Media Day reactions, quotes, and our first look at the 2025-2026 St. John's Red Storm. All coming up on this episode of the Johnny's Report. Well, it's officially the start of the 25-26 season when you get to the individual school media days, especially when we get to Big East Media Day. That's when it feels like the culmination of the offseason coming to an end, and when it feels like basketball season is really ramping up. Of course, the NBA will be beginning in this upcoming week for a lot of you Knicks fans out there. That's, of course, going to be an exciting time for sure in this upcoming year. But it's also exciting for St. John's, and that's, of course, what we care about. That's what we're going to be talking about here today. We'll be giving an in-depth look at some of the quotes that Rick Pitino has given. I have the quotes right here that we'll be playing and listening to together as we discuss some interesting tidbits, some interesting notes, couple funny questions thrown in there, and a couple funny answers from the Hall of Fame head coach. We begin here with this first one. Rick was asked about the target on St. John's back. Have they been discussing it in the locker room? Has it been something that they've been talking about?
We really haven't discussed that too much. We're just trying every single day to get better defensively. That's probably the area that we're, anytime you have 9, 10 new players, it's been a lot easier getting them to mesh than I thought because they're such outstanding individuals as people. So it's just a matter of we want to try to see where our weaknesses lie. We don't know that as of yet because some days we're very high in assists, very low in turnovers, and other days it's just the opposite. So we're just trying to see who meshes the best together. We have a good idea now of who's going to start out against Towson, and we have an idea of the 10, 11 guys that are going to play and the 4 that will not play. We really haven't discussed.
So we obviously got our first look at St. John's against Towson. We'll talk about that towards the end of the episode, but you heard from Coach there. I was going to talk about do an episode about how St. John's can avoid, and I brought this up in an episode prior, avoid what has happened to Penn State this year, not in terms of obviously the head coach being removed, and that's another reason why I ended up not doing it, because it wouldn't have made sense from that standpoint. But coming in as a top 5 team and going into the season like a lion and going out like a lamb, which is something, of course, that St. John's fans would like to avoid from their Johnnies this year. And I think what kind of led me to not record that episode, and I'll obviously touch on it here, but St. John's brings back one starter from last year in Zuby Ejiofor. So it's not as if, okay, they're bringing back Simeon Wilcher. Okay, they're bringing back R.J. Lewis or Kadari Richmond or someone along those lines. And it's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can't really sit there and talk too much about it and go in depth. Obviously, they'd like to not have, and of course, fans would like to not have what happened to the college football Penn State Nittany Lions happen to St. John's, but it's just kind of a tough comparison. But when I think about a target on their back, when I think about everyone kind of looking at them, looking up at them in the Big East standings, really kind of saying, man, these guys are going to be tough tonight. That's different than how teams, I think, were going in last year, where, sure, it's a Rick Pitino coach team, but who knows really what they're going to expect. But that same can be said for Bryce Hopkins. Here was this interesting tidbit from Rick Pitino.
Not really. It hasn't been a conscious. Bryce is also a great guy, but he's been good and solid the entire summer and now. And I'm not after good and I'm not after solid. I'm after great and passionate. And once he reaches that Mamba mentality that we're trying to put forth in every player and as the team, I think you're going to see one of the best players in the country. So as far as the weight is concerned, I'm not sure, Zach, I think he's built better. He's worked hard on his body because he's had a lot of time off from not playing. I mean,
So Rick Pitino, very, as he always is, he's going to tell it like it is. We know this from years gone by. We've seen it firsthand from a St. John's standpoint. What I find so interesting about Bryce Hopkins is whether or not he can return to form to that guy that was among one of the most dominant players in the conference. The hope is that he will get there, and I think he has obviously the right coach, the right assistant coaches, the right players around him to get there. The question is, will he? And we'll have another comment Rick Pitino made after the Towson game coming up later on. But that was one that kind of took people by surprise in the way that he described Bryce Hopkins. Now, what took me even by more surprise was this on Ian Jackson.
well, I'm going to be very frank with this statement by Ian. I was really concerned this summer, at the beginning of the summer, that I thought this would be too much for Ian to handle coming home with all his reputation and the way he was playing at that time. But Ian, without question, is the most improved basketball player. He's gone from the 10th or 11th man to one of the top three on our team. And I'm really happy for him that he's evolved. Because when you say a player is a sponge, he's in the offices after practice with Coach Mass and Coach Walsh and looking at film and where can I get better. So I'm really, really excited and happy that he's evolved into the player he is today. Because it was tough to watch the beginning of the summer.
Wow. Be frank all you want, Coach Pitino. That was, I mean, that's as frank as it gets. That's telling it as is. I'll tell you, Ian Jackson was one of the players I feel like I didn't hear a ton about throughout the summer, and maybe we now know why. We definitely heard a lot about Kelvin Odih. More on him in just a second. But when it comes to Ian Jackson, when it comes to, how it went at UNC, to be labeled as kind of a hometown hero, so to speak, I think would be a little bit of an understatement for how excited fans were that St. John's landed, the former highly touted recruit. And when I think about Ian Jackson back in the spring, I think about, okay, this guy is going to be, 10th, 11th guy wasn't even in my mind with Ian Jackson. So that was definitely a comment that that'll blow your hair back a little bit there. So I'm obviously happy that later on he mentions that he's gotten a lot better, but it was one that kind of made you go, wow, man, this is really a guy in Rick Pitino. What they say is true. He's not for everyone, and he is going to make you better as you continue through if you are able to obviously show the ability to adapt. Now, to what I mentioned about Kelvin Odih, here was Rick Pitino talking about what has been an injury sustained to him early on in the preseason.
Is Kelvin okay now? Like, what was?
Yeah, he missed kind of a freak injury with his pectoral muscle. He missed about a week's time, and he's just coming around. He's missed maybe about 2 weeks of practices, but he's healthy again. It was a real freakish injury, and we're not sure how it originated.
So he mentions that they're not sure how it necessarily originated, but I would like to think that it was something obviously off the court. We can maybe do a little speculating there. Maybe something in weight training. I don't know. But I really wonder for Kelvin Odih how this kind of process has been, because as a freshman at 18 years of age, going through that Rick Pitino defense, going through the first couple of practices is not easy. Former players always talk about it. It's grueling, it's tough. It's one of the, you know, most intense atmospheres, most intense teams to play on because of the level of the competition and what is expected of you. So that's something that I would be interested to hear about. And obviously, as we get closer and closer to the start of the season, you want to have everyone as healthy as possible because, just for the sake of needing everyone to be healthy, number one. But number two, it gives you an opportunity to, of course, be able to build chemistry together. This is obviously a new team. This is a team that hasn't played with each other in a real game. I mean, I know they played, a lot of them played, with each other against Towson, but trying to build that chemistry, that cohesion. Remember, in the 23-24 season, Rick Pitino was first. It took them almost the entire year to really build that. And last year, it took until, if memory serves me correctly, around Christmas time, I feel like when we got to the Big East Conference play, that's when, okay, we can kind of start to see who the faces are here, who are the guys that are going to be trusted down the stretch in games, who are your, because we really didn't have many, if any, outside shooters that can be relied upon. Who's the guys that can make plays defensively? Who are those spark plugs? That's something that you want to have everyone fully healthy. And obviously, Odie, with the recruit that he is and what's expected of him, that's, of course, at the utmost importance. Now, earlier this summer, I guess we're not in summer anymore, we're in fall, but back in July, we spoke to Thomas Cavanaugh of Rumble in the Garden. He said we had some media availability, chance to kind of get the behind the scenes look at the practices and whatnot. Rick Pitino mentioned that this is going to be a positionless team. Well, here was Rick talking about positionless basketball.
Offensively, we do play positionless basketball. I would say that the ball is in Zuby's hands just as much as Oziah's. So on offense, they all handle the basketball. They all bring it up. So I think it is positionless on offense. Defensively, we sort of match up size-wise, athletically, as well as physically with certain matchups.
Gotcha.
So I gotta be honest. I was a little shocked when I was first made aware that was going to be the fundamentals of the team moving forward and the identity. I kind of thought that, we would see a little more structure. Now, maybe that is going to be the case, but in terms of a traditional system where, this is your primary ball handler, primary shooter, guys are, these are going to be the guys you expect on the wings at the five. I feel like, and I heard Coach Pitino mention this last year, it may have been after the very first game. He said Zuby is not a 5, he's more of a 4. And I thought at the time that was him challenging Zuby to really get to get more of his game going, try and motivate him a little bit through the media, which is something that, as we know, Rick Pitino likes to do. Well, now hearing this, I kind of feel like he's taken what he's seen out of Zuby and he's building this offense around Zuby. And I assume he feels as though, hey, we could be at our best and we could really create a new dynamic to our game if Zuby's playing further out and with the ball in his hands, which is interesting. Okay, now this was a funny one. So Roger Rubin of Newsday was asked Coach Pitino about whether or not St. John's has taken any type of motivational aspect from UConn being ranked higher than St. John's. UConn is ranked 4th, St. John's 5th. We'll see, obviously, where in the Big East coaches poll, where they have the two teams, should be, 1 and 2. This was a funny response from Coach Pitino.
I've thought of a lot of different things in the last 6 months. That's not one of them, Roger. So I'll go home tonight and think about that one. No, I don't think our guys think about that. We have great respect for UConn. The more Big East teams that are ranked, the better. We love to have a lot of Big East teams ranked. One of us will be probably 1 or 2 preseason Big East team. So we have great respect for Connecticut and Marquette and Creighton and all of them. So the more teams ranked in the Big East at a high level, the better off our league will be. And this year's, I can guarantee you that you're going to see major improvements from Georgetown, Providence, Villanova to a certain degree. It's going to be a really tough league this year.
Well, we know last year St. John's had the benefit of there being a lot of teams that were just average in the Big East. And by me saying that, I mean they had the benefit of teams not really being either A, at their best, like a UConn, or B, I mean, you look from because eventually Xavier got going, but you look from 5th on down in the standings. I mean, it was kind of like put them however you want them. And then obviously you got to Seton Hall way down there. But I mean, there was just so many teams, so many programs and coaches that I don't think lived up to a lot of the expectations. And it really kind of took, and not the fun out of it. I mean, obviously that's not true, but it kind of took that pizzazz out of you, out of what you expect to be real tough competition in the Big East. And that just wasn't there last season. So hopefully that's going to be there, as you spoke about. But as you heard him go back and forth there a little bit with, well, not really go back and forth, although eventually he says, you know what, Roger, if you think we should take offense to that, then we'll take offense to that on your account. Was kind of, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that's kind of where they left it, jokingly, of course. But I think UConn being ranked higher, I mean, I believe that is based off of the fact that you look at what you expect out of Dan Hurley, out of UConn. You expect them to be a top 5 team. They don't expect that out of St. John's. They don't really know what St. John's is going to look like under Coach Pitino this season. It's a completely new, not completely new, but there are a lot of different moving parts that were there last year that aren't there last year. So it's kind of funny how, man, maybe if a lot of guys were returning from last year, you could put St. John's higher than UConn, but obviously that's not the case, and we have to see how this team ultimately meshes. Now, playing at MSG is obviously an opportunity that St. John's and Coach Pitino do not take lightly. They don't look at it as, like, you hear guys all the time say, "Oh, it's just another game." No, it's it's whatever. It's another game for us. It's just another atmosphere. No, St. John's takes, and Rick Pitino is really hammering this home. You have to feel as though this is a gift for you. This is something that if you're going to play there, you have to play at this level. Something that St. John's hadn't been doing at the Garden in quite some time. Last year, obviously, was a terrific season at MSG. They went undefeated. I personally believe that this message that he lays out here about the Garden, the atmosphere playing at the Garden, especially early in the year, is really rings true.
It's an early test for us to see if we're made for the Garden in November, because it's difficult college basketball in November in this town. The Knicks is the toughest ticket probably in the history of their organization. You can't get a Knick ticket. And that's the prospects of winning a championship. So for St. John's, it's the Michigan game is a big test for us. Alabama's a big test. We've only sold 11,000 tickets for Alabama so far. We want to sell out the Garden for that. Ole Miss will be a tough sell. It's a Saturday night. It's going to be based on Michigan. I believe it or not, Iona's probably the best selling ticket so far. That's a testament to Iona fans coming out. The last time they played in the Garden, they sold out the Garden and beat Louisville. So I hope that doesn't happen as well for us. But it's great that we could schedule Iona in the Garden. Certainly, I owe them so much with my career. So it's great to get them back in the Garden. It's been a long time for them. But it's going to be a great test to see if we're built. Obviously, we sold out the last 6 games of the season. Let's see if we're right now. It doesn't look like we're going to sell out early sales, Michigan or Alabama or Ole Miss tickets. Now we've gone from, I think, 5,000 season tickets to 9,500, which is great. But we've got to get about 6,000-7,000 more tickets sold to make that happen. Those sellouts.
The hope obviously is that they sell out every single game at MSG, as you heard Coach Pitino say. My take on what he was talking about, the early season action, last year I had the pleasure of being at the New Mexico game, and it was November. I may have been early December. But regardless, the Jets were at home against the Colts, and it was obvious that St. John's wasn't still on everyone's top priority. I feel like this time around this year, I hope with a 31-win season last year, with Coach Pitino, with what they did, because to be honest, everyone and their mother talks about last year and how St. John's is the only 2 seed to not be able to advance. Well, if you talk to St. John's fans about that and really try and get under their skin, me personally, I mean, listen, you just, as a fan perspective, it was such a season you did not anticipate. You thought you'd have it for, you thought about it for years. You hoped they'd one day be back in the Big East championship game to be the top seed heading into the Big East tournament, no less. Personally, I thought, well, they advanced past Omaha. Arkansas was charging. They were hot at the right time. It is what it is. At where we are trying to build St. John's to put them back on the map. That's kind of been the whole point. Now, obviously, if you're able to win tournament games and advance further, that's great too. But to sit there and be like, oh my God, this year was an absolute failure, whatever have you, that is further from the truth. This is one of those years, last year especially, where you go into it, where you just kind of say, hey, we like to be the top team in the conference, but we're not going to be upset if we don't advance to the second weekend. Now, obviously, when it happened, you were upset in time at the moment. But as I said, give it a month. You're going to reflect on this season and say, man, what a ride it was. And I think that's ultimately the way St. John's fans felt about it. I think that's the way we've all kind of taken it in, let it soak in. And, we've gotten better at different positions. Now, I'm tying this all back to hopefully that has stuck with what St. John's has added. Hopefully that has stuck, and St. John's will now become a team that, although he talked about they've only sold 11,000 for Alabama, and I'd like to think we could pump those numbers up. But with that being said, as we near closer and closer, hopefully St. John's will be able to get those sellouts. And selling out Alabama is going to be tough in terms of where we are. We get into the Big East Conference play, there will be sellouts, no doubt. And as you mentioned, the last 6 were. Circling back to that Bryce Hopkins comment, here was Rick Pitino after the Towson game.
Bryce, the last 2 days, had the best 2 practices of the season. He was awesome. The one day, the second unit won 44-11. Just blew out the red team because of Bryce. So I wasn't trying to send a message to Bryce. I was trying to teach him about greatness. And greatness doesn't happen without practicing great and developing that greatness inside of you. And he put on, I knew he was going to play well tonight because he was brilliant in practice the last 2 days. And that's what he's got to learn. Now look, understand he sat out the entire year last year. And he's really not in great basketball shape yet. But I thought he was terrific tonight. You just try to be great every single day by giving extraordinary effort. He's been given ordinary good effort. You can't become great. You know, you hear all the stories. You read all the reels about Kobe and Michael and their competitive nature, and that's what he's got to get. I don't want him to be the best player on our team or I want him to be one of the best players in the country. And unless he understands that, he will never reach that plateau. And I believe he can. And that's why I said the things I said. Bryce, the last 2 days.
So he filled up the stat sheet. 13 points, 5 and 9 from the field. Had 6 boards, 4 assists, a block, and 3 steals. St. John's, they were relentless defensively in the 73-63 exhibition win against Towson. What hopefully they'll take is they got to be, of course, better offensively. I think we can all agree the half-court offense looked a little bit like last year early on in the first half. I'd like to see St. John's be able to really thrive in that area. Shooting from beyond, they were 4-17. Towson Sannon hit one early, which was, had to feel like kind of when was the last time you saw that happen for St. John's? Ian Jackson was 1 of 4. Sadiku was 2 of 3. He took last year's 3-point shooting personal. And I expected maybe a little bit more 3-point shooting, especially out of lefty. Would have liked to have seen him potentially. He only played 7 minutes, but would have liked to have seen him maybe get some more minutes and obviously be able to get some more tick as well and be able to get some more action shooting from beyond. The real heavy hitters on this team, as I mentioned, we don't know yet, but we like to think it's going to be Bryce Hopkins. I think we kind of know Zuby Ejiofor will, of course, have a prominent role, but Ian Jackson's another guy. Towson Sannon. Dylan Mitchell, especially what he can do defensively. Towson Sannon, his shooting, and Osiah Sellers' shooting as well. That's going to be something that we're going to be anticipating as we move forward. But all right, everyone, that's going to do it for me. We will be back on later on in the week. Big East Media Day. It's Tuesday. Big East Energy Network will be there. We'll be privileged to be at MSG. Next time I'm on, I won't be dressed like Mr. Rogers. But this was Sunday best, I guess, if you will. So we'll be back on later in the week, as mentioned, talk about Big East Media Day, what we heard from head coach Rick Pitino and players as well, and some other faces around the Big East as we prepare for the 2025 and 2026 St. John season. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. This has been the Johnny's Report.